Hey, so about our
You won't believe what I just found.
A winning lottery ticket?
No, I mean like really unbelievable.
Oh, the missing link in Creationist Heads?
No, but I found the perfect video to respond to.
That is pretty unbelievable. What is it?
Those who believe in God claim that God gives them strength.
Yeah, okay, I'm getting drunk. Hey everyone, I'm Jimmy, though you might know me as Mr. Atheist from my YouTube channel, Mr. Atheist.
Belief in God has one very significant benefit. Those who believe in God claim that God gives them strength.
Alright, fine, but if you gotta bring your higher power, so can I. And I'm gonna need some of that omnipotent strength to get through this.
Belief is not a necessity to claim that God gives you strength, nor is it the only socially acceptable source of strength. You can claim your partner gives you strength, for example, or your children, or the inspiration of a deceased famous person or a relative, or simply a lot of diligent practice.
They tell themselves, God is on my side. His strength is my strength.
Well, fooling yourself to get, for example, braver can be beneficial, yes, but it also has its negative sides. For example, what if God suddenly doesn't give you his strength anymore? Or at least you imagine he doesn't. What if you believe he doesn't like you anymore? Will you still be able to manage your problems after his strength has left you? Wouldn't it be better to do it with your own strength in the first place?
Imagine someone with the same degree of self-confidence who did not believe in God.
Same degree, so someone who thinks highly of themselves, but also leaves out the part where they get special treatment from God, and that's where they get their sweet skills. Something tells me that's not quite what you're trying to refer to, so go on.
That person's position would be, I am great all by myself. I have God-like greatness, not because God is on my side, but because I am God-like.
Your analogy is utterly flawed. Saying I am great all by myself is not the same as saying I have God-like greatness. And telling yourself that God is on your side and therefore you are great, that is also not the equivalent to you have God-like greatness. So your statement already completely falls apart. But that aside, you base your comparison on two implied assumptions. One, that there is a God, and two, that this God is great. And when you assume that position for a Christian, that makes perfect sense. A Christian can easily believe that he's aided by God or as powerful as his God through God. However, when assigning this to an atheist, you end up in a bit of a trouble, because not only are atheists rather known for their lack of belief in a divine entity, but even when thinking about the concept, many don't necessarily abide by the Christian standard of a God. When atheists think of a hypothetical God, they could easily be thinking about a stupid weakling, a vile abusive creature, or sometimes they don't really have a concept for a God at all, and don't really know what to make of it. So an atheist could easily say, I'm greater than your God, which seems to be the gist of what you're saying, and in his mind still think he's a very mediocre normal person. He could refer to an unpleasant, selfish, creepy God, and would therefore not even get close to the same kind of confidence a believer would display when he is stating that he is great because God made him great. In fact, an atheist could easily say I'm greater than your God while feeling utterly inept, weak, and horrible, just not as horrible as your God.
But let's put that aside for a moment and assume that your goal actually is to state your greatness. Whether you think you have godlike powers because you actually have them or not doesn't change the fact that you're here stating your greatness.
The latter person is an egomaniac and a social pariah. The former person is seen as an appropriately modest person and is not a social pariah.
Are you seriously telling me that saying I'm strong sounds egomaniacal to you? Oh, you're strong, you can handle hardship? Horrible thing to say. Right? We two seriously disagree on what counts as egomaniacal. But for the sake of argument, let us make it egomaniacal. Let us use a different sentence. Let us say, I am the best golf player in the universe, instead of I'm strong. So, does it really sound more egomaniacal to say I'm the best golf player in the universe than it would be to say I'm the best golf player in the universe because God gave me that power? Because if in this case you still argue the way you did, then I would argue that your own perception may need a bit of a tiny rehaul. And that you sort of didn't really get the whole modesty memo. Because you see, the purpose of modesty is not really to claim awesomeness and then just blame God for it. It's more about not bragging about stuff in the first place. Which, by the way, atheists are perfectly capable of doing.
Stating or even just believing that you have this God-given strength, but without certainty as to whether or not this God actually exists, at very best, that's impractical. At worst, it's delusional. So if you are disproportionately strong compared to everyone else, but your God doesn't exist, then the strength you have is actually coming from somewhere within you. Which means there are almost certainly completely natural and positive ways you could draw on that strength. And by asking the question, where does that strength come from? You actually have the potential to unlock it or to realize that it's not actually real. You know, like your God.
But they are both equally self-confident.
Okay, wait, so self-confidence equals egomaniacal?
It is irrelevant that the one attributes his strength to God, whereas the other attributes it to his own ego.
That is right. It is irrelevant. At best, it tells you something about the dogma they do or do not adhere to. But what is relevant is the perspective of the people stating it. If you say something like, I have strength, I can get through hardship, that is a very, very different statement to, I have strength because I'm the best and the greatest and nothing can keep up with me, regardless of whether you add the God caveat or not.
Or rather, it is relevant, but in a way that redounds to the benefit and the credit of the believer in God and to the discredit and disadvantage of the non-believer.
It's obvious that you're trying to pass off this super tired argument that atheists are egomaniacs. But the truth is that there are just as many egomaniacal atheists as there are of any other group. But denial of a God and by proxy the devil, that does mean you have to acknowledge your own achievements and with that take responsibility for your own misdeeds. It doesn't mean you have to escalate yourself to the level of deity or omnipotence. In fact, in many cases, the opposite happens as you realize you don't have this sense of destiny anymore, or this idea that God thinks about you every day. For many people, becoming an atheist is realizing you're not that special. Anyway, sorry I interrupted your totally apt and not at all condescending exposition.
By virtue of believing in God, the believer can, without weakening himself with narcissism, have the excess of self-belief that is needed to tap into one's strengths.
I am sorry, but a person who's a narcissist will be a narcissist no matter if you consider him one or you don't. If the mere disbelief in a God turns a moderately self-confident person into a narcissist in your eyes, then that doesn't make him an unpleasant person, but you. That kind of thinking simply reveals to me that your indoctrination and your worldview have a putridly stinking impact on your character, and that I would be much better off finding more pleasant company. Aside from that, in order to overcome limitations without dogmatic sky fairies, it usually requires the notional acknowledgement of these limitations in the first place. So a good case can be made that more scrutiny can lead to better improvement in some cases.
Let's pretend for a moment that you're correct here, specifically about where the confidence is coming from. I mean, you aren't, but let's pretend you are. You are still advocating for self-confidence rooted in delusion rather than reality, and then presenting a false dichotomy. There are many more options than being a believer who is modest and an atheist who's a narcissist.
And by virtue of not believing in God, the non-believer cannot, without so weakening himself, have that degree of self-belief.
So, in other words, a believer can get away with self-aggrandizing more often without being called out because he blames God, whereas a non-believer will quicker be called out on it? Interesting. And how exactly is this beneficial to society or even to the believer himself? All it achieves is that you will have more obnoxious believers than non-believers, and that you have a few more people deluded about their actual abilities on top of being deluded about God.
So I guess in your mind, we all live in this world where we can't draw confidence from each other. I can't look to people I love for support and strength. Can I also not find that strength through, say, counseling or therapy? And while we're on the topic, I wonder what's more narcissistic. Claiming that a person can find strength through natural means, or claiming to have the ultimate knowledge on the only way to be both strong and modest at the same time.
So belief in God makes it possible for people to get the better of their own insecurities and to draw on their own powers without alienating their peers.
I disagree wholeheartedly. Recognizing that when you achieve something, you do so out of your own strength is much more encouraging than to keep telling yourself that you needed the divine help to make it in the first place. And luckily, most people are not completely indoctrinated weirdos and will not alienate you for such an acknowledgement.
And also without becoming grandiose.
Should I remind you of what you just said a few moments ago?
The latter person is an egomaniac and a social pariah. The former person is seen as an appropriately modest person and is not a social pariah. But they are both equally self-confident.
If an atheist gets called a narcissist more easily for being self-confident than a believer does, as in the believer can get away with uttering the exact same sentiment, then it makes it easier for the believer to become self-aggrandizing, not the unbeliever.
And this is surely one of the primary purposes, psychologically speaking, of belief in God. Those who believe in God do so not so much because they have erroneous metaphysical beliefs.
Let me stop you right there. Those who take a God for granted and attribute supernatural strength to it, and subsequently to themselves, granted by him, do hold erroneous metaphysical beliefs. But don't let me interrupt you. Please, do go on.
But because they want to be able to tap into their own strengths without either weakening themselves with narcissism or antagonizing their peers.
Summary: Jeebus said I'm special. You can't tell me I'm not. In fact, he gives me superpowers. But don't you worry, as an all-powerful superhero, I'm also quite humble.
Let's make one more.
Oh, no, he said, do we really have to do another one?
Are you getting cold feet?
No, I'm just, I'm hungry, I want to have a snack first, and I have enough for all of us. I won't do you wrong like Godless Engineer did.
These are mine.
Damn it, John. Fine, let's just do this.
Atheists do not have God, so they have people instead.
Actually, atheists don't really have God. It's usually more the other way around, where God has them. You know, as toys, as pets, barbecue toppings at times, stuff like that.
I'm with her. The phrasing doesn't actually reflect the God belief. According to most religions, only God can send me to hell when I don't do what he wants me to do. If I was in charge, I'd be sending God to hell. You know, Dallas.
Non-atheists do have God, so they don't need people.
I remember having heard that argument before. People who had God to save them when they had a car crash, for example. Apparently the ambulance drivers and emergency room stuff were kinda just decoration or something. I also find it rather impressive how you build your own house, create your own energy for your self-made light bulbs, and your self-made computer with which you go online through your self-made modem that for some reason works without internet provider. And all of that just to selflessly tell us poor atheists on the internet how much we would not need you to tell us that we wouldn't need you if we only had God.
Wait, so non-atheists don't need God? I wonder then why I've always seen these churches just completely filled with people minding their own business. And why do those churches have power hierarchies if not to put people in charge of other people? And by the way, this would be a super embarrassing argument if like social media and the internet was covered with big religious groups and communities. You know, like a church away from church.
Therefore, non-atheists...
I think I like that word non-atheist, though I might go with like a atheist instead.
What about simply calling them theists? Nah.
Therefore, non-atheists are able to be independent of other people.
Every human being is dependent of other humans, to some degree or another. That's just how our species works. We're not some kind of fish who after they hatch out of their eggs just swim off to never be seen again. The mere fact that you're sitting there talking into a camera means that you had humans around you who not only taught you to speak in the first place, but also told you in one way or another that you can actually talk to people by looking into a goofy looking lens. You could make the argument that people who are really into invisible friends don't need real friends all that much. Or that some theists are really talented in being asocial cave trolls. Or non-social, as you would probably call it. However, I can easily name you quite a few atheists who see neither daylight nor other humans in real life except of in rare occasions, which means that the social cave trolling is not a non-atheist's only feature. And no matter if you are an atheist or a non-atheist cave troll, you do still need people. You just don't need to talk to them all that much.
Boy, this would be an embarrassing argument if the Bible was full of verses about people getting together and building each other up. Thank God that's not the case. Do you get it? Every time I say it's not the case, it actually is the case.
They are not, or at least do not have to be, group people. And nothing scares a group person more than a non-group person. And there is nothing that so makes a group person feel judged and ashamed as the presence of a non-group person.
You make a lot of assertions that are unfounded and not quite true to be kind about it. Let us start with the most ridiculous one. Your claim that non-atheist people don't have to be group people, but atheist ones have to be.
I go to great effort to not leave my house if I don't have to, so for being a group person, I'm doing a lot of work to never be in a group. Yeah, that's right. I'm atheist. I'm not a group person. You're wrong. But generally, humans themselves are quite social. They are social animals. And much of our economy actually runs on this principle. In fact, if just religious people stopped being group people, our economy would collapse. I'm looking at you, Irish bars.
The next claim you make is that nothing scares group people more than non-group people.
Nothing scares a group person more than a non-group person.
When you say nothing scares a group person more than a non-group person, then we're talking about an emotional reaction. Something for which we can provide evidence. And that is exactly what I want from you. Evidence. I find it very hard to believe that being a group person or not being a group person, words which you didn't even define yet, are necessarily related to someone's reaction to other people. For example, why would you necessarily have to care about other people's feelings if you are a group person? You could merely enjoy their company, and for the rest not really care about them. Or if you happen to deal with a creepy person who tells you he loves setting houses of lovers on fire, you might tend to avoid that kind of person, no matter if you are a group person or not. You do not need to be a group person to have that sort of reaction. Your next claim is that a group person feels judged and ashamed by a non-group person.
And there is nothing that so makes a group person feel judged and ashamed as the presence of a non-group person.
And yet again, this is something for which I demand evidence. Enjoying the presence of other people is not necessarily correlated with the amount of impact those other people have on this someone, no matter if they are group people or not. Social anxiety, a common cause for people to avoid social interaction with other humans, is bad because of the fact that people affected by it avoid these interactions mostly because of the fear to be judged or embarrassed in one form or another. And unless you want to label all people with social anxiety group people, you have hardly any leg to stand on with your assumption. However, what I personally find extremely interesting is that last part you mentioned.
As the presence of a non-group person. As the presence of a non-group person.
You didn't say the non-group person makes them feel ashamed. You said that the presence of a non-group person makes them feel judged and ashamed. Merely being there. If I was driving in a subway and you sat next to me, would I feel ashamed or judged because of your presence? No, of course not. Even if you started singing Hallelujah out of tune, it would still not make me feel judged or ashamed. Because I didn't make a clown of myself. You did. At best, I would feel a slight, very slight, hardly noticeable sense of guilt for internally being entertained and laughing at your expense.
Also, if someone believes in God, then he also believes that there are objective standards of truth and goodness.
I might be going into whataboutism here a bit, but people who believe in a deistic God, a creator without any interest in our actions, could easily come to the conclusion that God is subjective. Likewise, there are different definitions and standards for what is considered truth. And while many people generally agree that truth ought to be factual and not dependent on our perception, for example, that the earth is round, no matter if it looks flat to us or not, there will always be exceptions, such as flat earthers. Believing that there is one objective standard doesn't mean that there is one objective standard. The same way that believing you can fly doesn't make you hover around in the air when you jump out of the second floor's window.
And if someone does not believe in God, he is that much more likely to have a communitarian conception of truth and of goodness. In other words, he is that much more likely to believe that truth and goodness are what people say they are.
See, you say that, and yet on the non-religious side, you have the emergence of great things like skepticism and science, both of which demand those who engage have a good reason to believe before believing. On the other side, you have these men in what I admit are fierce dresses, telling people what is objectively good.
Someone who believes in God is free from the group and to that extent has free will.
Free will has nothing to do with whether you're in a group or not. It has to do with whether or not you're an independent actor and if your actions were sourced in choice or if they were inevitable to occur in the order and way that they did.
I could argue that religious groups, especially the more fundamentalist ones, like to put pressure on their congregation to ensure group cohesion. But that would just be super unrealistic. Perhaps just as unrealistic as to claim that, especially in very religious surroundings, it usually seems to be the atheist who showcases more free thinking and individualism than many of his fellow non-atheist neighbors. But that would require having free will to the extent of thinking for myself. You know, like a non-atheist. Oh well, I guess I will instead just not think at all and ask my audience, my group, what they ought to think and reply to you instead. Right?
Someone who does not believe in God is that much less likely to be free from the group and is therefore that much more likely not to have free will.
So to this guy, coercion is the same as lack of choice. Got it.
Can you imagine if people would really believe that? Dear police officer, I want you to know that I am not a non-atheist. My group told me to drive over red. Since I have no free will, as this random YouTuber on the internet has told me, and to whom I have to listen, because without God I cannot not listen to him or make up my own mind, I cannot be held accountable for this traffic violation. Yours sincerely, an atheist. Yeah, that would work out splendidly.
Quite simply, those who believe in God are that much less likely to be bureaucrats than those who don't.
Boy, this would be an embarrassing argument if, like, most politicians and bureaucrats, oh, fuck it. What world are you living in?
And there is nothing that a bureaucrat hates and fears so much as a non-bureaucrat.
False. Spiders.
And also leaking pens.
Pens that leak spiders.
Yeah, what he said.
And that is why atheists are so militant.
First of all, I need to understand how you get from people being group people to people being militant. How exactly do you make that connection? What is the missing link hidden in your mindset that connects the metaphorical snails to the metaphorical spaceships here? And secondly, you just kept arguing this entire video how atheists are supposed to be group people because they have no God, and how group people feel judged and ashamed at the presence of non-group people. But now you're telling us that atheists are militant, which I assume includes being a bit more vocal, voicing their opinion. So may I remind you that the majority of the US population is not atheist, and therefore if atheists would want to be group people and avoid being judged, they would also have to avoid this kind of confrontation and not be very militant? How exactly do you reconcile these two?
To sum up, non-atheists have God and are therefore independent of others. Atheists do not have God and are therefore dependent on others. And group people hate and fear non-group people.
Have you considered that maybe atheists, more so than being militant, are actually active? And maybe that would be more accurate since traditionally atheists have not been represented equally and fairly, especially the way religious people are in things like government. Or maybe, just maybe we legitimately believe that religion is a scam. And so perhaps we actually give a shit about other people and want to help them break out of that scam. Nah, I'm just kidding. We obviously just love sinning and we want to turn all your kids gay.
Really? I thought it was the frogs.
Oh no, we're done with those. We're on to humans now.
Oh, okay. Wait. Why did we skip the mosquitoes?
Mosquitoes can't speak English.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Thank you all for watching. If you like what I do, please let me know by thumbing up the video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and hit the bell. Please leave me your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you really like what I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And my dear Reptoid friends, please do go over to Mr. Atheist's channel and push the red deploy subscription button for the offense of not having been careful and letting godless engineers steal the red velvet cookies again.